Welcome to Prime Suspects, alongside Adam Bjorn and Prime Sports co-founder Joe Brennan Jr. I'm your host, Matt Landis. Adam, you mentioned on last week's episode that it's a relatively slow time on the sports betting calendar. With that in mind, what's the most noteworthy action you've observed since then?
Olympics ice hockey. I was just running through the numbers right now and taking a quick look. Tennis was rough. NCAA was good. NBA was good. Generally, we had, I think, 3 out of 4 green weeks. New Jersey was real good. Ohio, I can't remember if it was Arizona or Kentucky, had a slight loss, but lower volume, but pushing through. And, again, we had some wins. But yeah, just quickly looking at it, ice hockey and the Olympics for the past week was the best results across the board.
And was that in terms of handle and or hold, USA versus Canada for the gold medal match, or just the entire quarterfinals onward to the finish for men's hockey since we last recorded?
It looks like across the board for the week, held 32% on the Olympic ice hockey. So, up there with DraftKings FanDuel numbers that we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, it's practically SGP stuff.
Overall for the week, we held just over 5%, which is pretty strong. But yeah, that was the standout. Another one that was standout overall was the Winter Olympics. So I guess even the other events of, I guess my claim of bookies never win on the Olympics has just been shot right in the head. And maybe I should make more calls like that, trying to reverse jinx whatever possible that we can.
Well, speaking of holding, 30% plus Super Bowl revenue reportedly surpassed $100 million across the tri-state area of New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, with holds of 30% plus in each state. Adam, is it fair to assume these 3 states can be taken as a proxy for Super Bowl results across the U.S.? And if so, how does this compare with what you expected pregame?
So as I'd said, the result, and you've just said pretty much East Coast, almost Massachusetts kind of states, which with the way that the blowout was kind of expected, I guess. 30% is pretty strong. I imagine it could have been higher if that last touchdown had have been recorded as well, because I think across the industry it was Seattle and over, which is very rare of needing favorite and over, was the ultimate goal. All those points in the last quarter. Who knows what happens in the live side of it as well, and how that sort of, people just jumping on the under after 3 quarters, whatever that live line was, going, well, it's going to go under. And then, of course, how many ever points in that last quarter sort of blows them all to pieces as well. So when you have a bit of a swing like that last quarter brought, there is going to be some aspect to it there as well. But not surprising based on what we've seen, what we had in-house. And I think there was a bit of East versus West, and there's not that many regulated states out West, sort of showed up a little bit as well.
Yeah, based on the super stream, everybody everywhere was on Seattle, but it would make sense in a more concentrated region in the Northeast. Definitely some Patriots love backfiring a bit when it came to people backing New England against the spread or on the money line in the Super Bowl. But Joe, let's pivot back to the Winter Olympics, because Adam touched on it a bit with the men's ice hockey. Things went out with a bang in the form of USA winning gold over Canada in overtime. And if we want to put a bow around the games overall, from the highlights to the lowlights, what are you going to remember most?
Unfortunately, my 10-year-old daughter being so entranced by figure skating, she now wants to do yet another incredibly expensive sport. And since Ilya lives right down the street, I guess we're going to be heading down that way. But no, it was great to see that final yesterday. Canada does not seem to be taking the loss very well. And I think maybe some in America who before yesterday couldn't tell you what all sides was in hockey are kind of guilty of spiking the ball here a little bit. But, I mean, you couldn't have asked for a better way to top off the games. The one thing I thought, and this came back, and this was over the course of the last 2 weeks of the Olympics, I think there's a few things that actually the Olympic Games could learn from our industry in regards to integrity. And I say that because perhaps Canada's, loss yesterday was the karmic result of their men's curling team, who were most definitely caught cheating on video, but then, were allowed to progress, and then they captured the gold medal, and then unwisely in their post-competition press conference spiked the ball in the world's face, said, if you thought we were cheating or something like that, I hope this image burns in your face. I was surprised to find out, and only found out then and there are no on-ice officials watching these guys. This is supposedly like golf, where they are supposed to self-report and penalize themselves, their own infraction. Like golfers are supposed to penalize themselves strokes. So it's interesting that you had that kind of result. I definitely think if this is an issue, and it seemed like it was, maybe they should have Hawkeye for curling. Maybe they should have some on ice officials so you don't have a result like this. But when you look at that, another example was the unusual scoring patterns that the French judge in the finals of the pairs ice dancing competition, where the French judge scored France much higher than the average of the other judges, and the U.S. much lower than the other judges. And so it really was an anomaly. It made me think, boy, it would be great if U.S. integrity was working that particular event. And so it's funny how, integrity issues, we hear an awful lot about the betting industry, and especially in the wake of some of these things like Vejante Porter and Terry Rozier and others, about us, and what it does, the integrity of the game and what it does to public perception. But it's amazing to me that when you have something as high profile as this, that only occurs once every 4 years, and that you have still these kind of judging. And this is not a new thing. This is something with the Olympics goes back as far as I've been watching them, since 1968, 1972. This is something that undermines it, and I would say would probably put an artificial cap on any potential future betting or prediction marketing for these events. So beyond that, obviously, I think the Winter Olympics are far more entertainment than the Summer Olympics. They're certainly more dangerous, and overall it was a great 2 weeks, and I'm glad that we did well.
I might want to circle back with you on the danger element when we get to something like pole vaulting come summer of 2028 here in LA, but I get you on a lot of the more adrenaline-based winter sports, to say the least. I think at this point, though, I'll make a pivot, if I may, from the self-reporting you touched on, Joe, and curling to self-regulating. We've seen a lot of in the prediction market space recently. Yet another busy week in that space, with Novig announcing a $75 million Series B funding round to take on platforms like Kalshi and Polymarket. And while that story garnered a lot of attention on social media, a less discussed LinkedIn post by Alan Casey from TX Odds offered an insightful window into how exchange dynamics can become influenced by different monetization models. Adam, based on how you've seen exchange ecosystems evolve over the years, what do you see as the right model and incentive structure to balance the needs of participants, including makers, takers, and the platforms themselves? And if you were advising a newer prediction market on its strategy, what would you suggest?
Don't enter the space. Great reflection of this is Alan spent a lot of time on the other side of the counter. On exchanges, I've been purely on the player side, unlike the sportsbook and whatnot. I mean, we've seen the exchanges for 20, 25 years now. They have all had different models. They've all tried to give it back as much as possible. They've tried to take as much as possible. Liquidity is king in all of it. Now, Kalshi, Polymarket, when you dive into those UIs, you can sort of see where the gaps significantly exist in the liquidity aspect of it. There is deals that have been done that I imagine actual negative earners to Kalshi and Polymarket, as Betfair in the day had zero commission markets. There was others that put out, I think BetDAC and Matchbook and whatnot at times have gone 0% commission on certain things just to get liquidity up and whatnot. Now, the only disclaimer that I will say is generally you need a big pot of fish. And America has a shit ton of fish when it comes to sports betting and trading and all those kind of things. I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but the ones I've always said, Betfair in the beginning was probably 33% professional bettors, 33% bookmakers, 33% fish. And now that's closer to sort of 40, 9.75%, 49.75%, maybe 0.5% fish on some soccer or some cricket and stuff like that. So there is an opportunity in the US. It's a little bit different, where there is a lot more people being aspirational traders and things like that. But how long does it last? What's the goal of it? And the fact that Kalshi is now valued at more than DraftKings just shows that there is no rhyme or reason as to why these valuations exist. Whoever got in early in these things potentially can get out with a bag full of money. So if you're at the beginning of these pyramid schemes, you're definitely going to get the bag at the, as you come in and get out, and others enter in. And then at the end of the day, someone will be left holding it, is sort of how I see it. On the legality sides, there's been probably 3 or 4 conversations in the last 2 or 3 weeks that are just polar opposites. Some believing that it'll be shut down by the federal government or the federal courts, Supreme Courts, whatever, at some stage. And then you just see the leagues getting into it, and just the leader of the CFTC and all these other aspects of it. So who knows where this ends up? I guess that's why we've spoken about it probably 60% of the episodes since they've been sort of talking about this, because it's just the Wild West. The ones that I really see not being active and pushing back on this is the state regulators. Yeah, sure. They're going after them in courts and things like that, but they're raising taxes. They should be reducing taxes. They're doing stuff that just aren't making this space competitive for anyone to operate in. And I've said many times, if we were 2 or 3 years behind our timeline, we'd be a sweeps, or we would have been a prediction market. However, we're caught in this very expensive gauntlet trying to make something happen that maybe it's just impossible. Maybe there is just no way to have some kind of SMB niche kind of operator live within the state regulated ecosystem. Because when you bring on board a California or a Texas or any of these others, the license fees are going to be so extraordinary, or the cost to get in is just going to be built up so extraordinary that it makes no chance for any kind of expansion of that nature. So it's a must-read article. It actually lays out the numbers and the economics a hell of a lot better than what we've probably spoken of here, just in black and white to go through it to truly understand it. But I'm still on the same side of the counter of saying exchanges, I don't see how they ultimately make money. I don't see how people forever, ever, as an investor, whatnot, because to make money in exchange is just tough.
And Joe, Novig's Series B came the same week that Drive by DraftKings, a venture capital firm investing in sports tech, published its thesis on the prediction market category. They noted it does not believe prediction markets are a simple winner-take-all platform story, which is to say it believes many companies can compete for market share. And this runs counter to what we've seen in sports betting, with the FanKings duopoly commanding about 75% market share. What's your analysis on this in terms of whether prediction markets follow the same dynamics as sports betting, with Kalshi and Polymarket as the dominant incumbents, or the prediction market share being fragmented across a greater number of platforms?
What a shock. Somebody's being hypocritical. Look, I mean, DraftKings, FanDuel, that has to be their narrative, that there isn't already a winner take all, because then they would essentially be saying, bypass us, just head straight to Kalshi and Polymarket. So they have to talk like that. They may be right. They're probably right. But they may be right in the sense of like the way that, I think I still have a Friendster account and a MySpace account somewhere. It's unlikely. I remember when my search engine of choice was Alta Vista. Kids, I'm really dating myself out here right now. Yeah, it's unlikely that the first entrants are the ones who maintain the commanding position in this. It's just the technology is going to change, etc. I don't think that they're doing anything but trying to maintain some sort of narrative upside. Because as Adam pointed out, like right now, when you look at caps on both of these companies, like DraftKings has fallen behind Kalshi. Kalshi was a lemonade stand a year ago. Now, the one thing to keep in mind about this is like, what is Kalshi and Polymarket and the prediction market? What have they really created? They've created, and this is going to be some incredibly rough math, but if 90% of the volume on Kalshi is sports, right? And then 10% is, how many times will President Trump say beautiful during the course of his State of the Union speech? That means they only created a market, like an incremental add to the market at 10%, right? So because FanDuel and DraftKings, they already own that 90% in most places. So if FanDuel and DraftKings are also able to incorporate those entertainment markets and other things, then that's an incremental add of 10% to their already pretty substantial business. So when I look at and again, I don't have a dog in this hunt here right now. I'm kind of just sitting there with my bucket of popcorn waiting to see how this one pans out in the courts and everywhere. But when you really pull back and you look at like what's really been created, when you pull back from all of like the bullshit about like ultimate sources of truth and blah, 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 the only thing they've done is they've created a venue where the new product is betting on stuff like entertainment bets. And that's not new. I mean, we've been betting on the Oscars and things like that for a long time. We've been betting on presidential elections for a long time offshore. So actually, no, there's not much that they've created new. Hedging, against changes in weather and things like that, that already existed. The CFTC was already regulating that stuff. So what have they created new and incremental to this marketplace? In the end, the answer is not much. So, while I get why DraftKings folks have taken that kind of rhetorical stance, and we really are just in kind of this space where it's more about competing narratives than it is about competing new product and technology and innovation. I haven't seen somebody tell me specifically what's the innovation that's been created by prediction markets so far. None. I mean, as far as exchanges, well, Alan Casey worked at BetDAC. Everybody knows Betfair. So those things, they already existed. You could do most of these markets on offshore sports books well before this. So nothing new's been created. Nothing innovative's created. The only thing that's been created is this space where somebody took a court decision about allowing exchanges to take contracts on presidential elections, and they spun it into a space where they're taking sports. I mean, what's been created? I guess some regulatory ballsiness, but that's about it.
All right, we'll go ahead and shift gears for the time being, but stay with prediction markets. Adam, there's been a lot of recent discussion about insider trading, with Giannis becoming a minority stakeholder in Kalshi, sparking concerns about conflict of interest. What do you make of him becoming the first active professional athlete to take upside in a prediction market company, and the potential implications in terms of unleashing a flood of other athletes buying shares in these platforms?
Well, I mean, potentially opens a can of worms. I'm sure when the NBA were doing their collective bargaining agreement and said that you could own, percentage of a gaming company, they didn't think there was going to be some new product where you could literally trade on, will a single player, and let's use Giannis as an example, will his contract be over under 100 million? Will he be traded at the next trade deadline? Will he sign for a new team? All these kind of things. It's somewhat innocent of going into this, but now any single event or market that is put up that includes a player that is an investor currently puts a massive spotlight on them on any kind of trade action and any kind of these things. Silver said, well, it's less than 1%. Well, 1% of Kelce right now is, cool, $10 million, $11 million. So while that may be insignificant to an NBA player or some league commissioner on a bigger paycheck, I mean, that's a shit ton of money for the rest of the world. So it only opens up negative aspects to it. I mean, for a player, why get involved with it at this level? Yes, you've got money, you want to invest it. There's a million other things that can be invested in. But for me, anything that now opens up where it's got to do with his team, him as a player, his contract, anything of that aspect, and then add in all the others. I believe Barkley was one that got into Polymarket at some point. Durant is also in there somewhere, but as an investor, I understand Durant's position is really more of an arm's length thing through another vehicle, which other people are really controlling. I don't know what the aspect of this one is, because it kind of laid out that it was a direct investment or a direct equity access to Giannis himself, who's managing it himself. Now, sure, he probably has a money market manager and things like that, but this seems more hands-on or more direct to ultimately tying it to the brand and the product and things like that. So there's only negativity that will ultimately come out of this. It'll either be silence, nothing will happen, or some kind of shit will happen on his next trade or his next contract or something like that gets put up. And then there'll be NBA crying that, foul, and all these others that have been crying about the tanking of games and all this kind of stuff. Nobody's looking at it from that perspective of there is only one side of this. There is only a negative side. There's never a positive side. And neutrality will be there until something happens on the negative side.
And Joe, we haven't touched much on the insider trading topic in recent weeks. What's your take on the current discourse and whether it can ultimately be curtailed?
I mean, it has to be. Whether it can or it can't be, it has to be. This starting to read the euphemisms, like informed trader. Okay, is informed trader an insider trader, or are they a sharp bettor? Or, all this stuff exists on a continuum. If informed trader is like the analog of sharp bettor, okay, so that means it's somebody who's a pro. It would be like a Rufus Peabody, who he does his homework, does his data, creates his models, things like that. And this is what he does, but he's using essentially public information. Insider is somebody putting up a market about, like, are we going to invade Venezuela in the next 2 weeks? And then they put it up there for like $500,000 or something like that. Like, I don't know, man. That seems incredibly specific and incredibly well funded on one side. Sounds like somebody's got some inside information. So I've heard all the rationales saying, like, well, even that kind of information being up there is a societal good because it gets the information out there. Well, it would be a societal good if it was coming through the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the Associated Press or something like that. But when somebody has a profit motive to get information out into the world, they're not a whistleblower, they're not a source, they're somebody who's trying to make money. They're trying to monetize information that they have and that the rest of the public doesn't. So in the end, yes, it's good to have information out there, but if the person who's providing the information is solely doing it for their financial benefit, then it's a crime. And look, not to make light of this is existential, I think, for prediction markets. If they want to, expand beyond, the stodgy old, like, what is the grain yield going to be? Or frozen orange juice future is going to go up and down. If they want to have better than the Duke and Duke future for prediction markets, they got to solve this one right away. And they got to get serious about, Kalshi and Poly Market, especially Kalshi. Listening to them whine about everything from geolocation to KYC to policing their markets and things like that, about how difficult and what a constraint it would be on. It sounds laughable to anybody who's got, like, I don't know, a sports betting license from New Jersey and what we have to do and to ensure that our markets are straight, they're clean, and that the people who are participating in it are participating in a fair manner. The fact that we have to monitor by law and under regulation the activity in our marketplaces to ensure that we don't have any kind of weird betting patterns that might hint that there's a problem with the integrity of the marketplace or something like that. We're getting pilloried about this stuff, about the Jonte Porters and the Terry Roziers and, the Cleveland Guardians bullpen. At the same time, these guys are trying to say that, there's a societal good to this. And that kind of disconnect, it just simply can't exist. And whether it's permitted by the law is one thing. The marketplace, people are not going to put their money into something that they know is fixed. They just aren't. So the CFTC might not step up to solve this problem. The companies might not step up to solve this problem. People will vote with their money, and they will take their money elsewhere.
And with that, we'll hit the home stretch this week with a jump ball for you guys, post-football and Olympics, and pre-baseball opening day, NBA and NHL playoffs, and World Cup. What, if anything, do you have your eye on this coming week in the sporting calendar?
Six Nations rugby, because if you looked at photographs side by side, separated at birth, our man Maximus and Andy Farrell, who heads up Ireland's rugby union team. I mean, watching those post-game interviews after Ireland just took a strap to England, this past weekend, I thought I was looking at Adam the whole time. It was absolutely fantastic. Remember right now that you already have, Grapefruit League games being played, split squads. Oh, baseball opening day can't get here soon enough, and we're now, we're like a week away from all the March craziness between conference tournaments starting and then our roll into the big dance. There's an awful lot out there. You certainly don't have to go hunting in the weeds and try and figure out, like, who are the really hot players in table tennis and what the hell bandy is in order to find stuff to bet on.
Adam, to Joe's point, once we get to conference tournaments and March Madness, things will heat up once again. But what's it like on your end trying to navigate this perhaps slowest time of the year on the sports betting calendar?
I'm glad Joe jumped in there because I have absolutely no idea what would be on this weekend. Yes, I'm participating in the Sports Nations, Six Nations. I have played the last few weeks on that. F1 must be around the corner, but right now we need more players. So the idea has been getting ready for the NCAA conference tournaments, then the big event itself, rolling into playoffs, both NHL, NBA. There's a little green jacket to be awarded there in April as well. And then sort of looking at that World Cup schedule, I had my game circled, USA, Australia, found out yesterday or today My son's graduation is the day after, so there is no way I can get from Seattle to Costa Rica. So it looks like I will be missing that game. But as for the next few weeks, it's really about buttoning this thing up, getting the bankruptcy through of Prime, getting our licensing through as Planetech and whatnot. So that's really what I've taken these last few weeks and the next few weeks to just dive into that and get this stuff ironed out to be ready. But, the good thing is that our volume's still decent. People are still trusting the brand for whatever else it's going through right now. People want action, and they're finding things to bet on. And, surprisingly, as I look at the numbers, the Olympic results were better than expected, but the volume was good, and people have just been still churning in and playing their games and whatnot. So, yeah, February's always tough, but thankfully there was an Olympics in there, and I guess we're only like 25 days or so away from opening night of March Madness. So this year will not stop. It just goes one into another, into another, into another. So looking forward to it and trying to make the most of it.
And we'll go ahead and sign off on that note. To the audience, whatever you have your eye on this coming week in the world of sports, we appreciate you lending us your ear for this episode. Thanks as always for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Prime Suspects. Register for Prime Sports at primesports.com and download the Prime Sports app. You can follow us on Twitter at PrimeSuspects_, at Joe Brennan Jr., and at Adam Bjorn 2. You must be 21 or over to play on Prime Sports. Always bet responsibly and within your limits. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER.